Okay, so you have 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. It's going up by tens. Okay, as long as you follow the same interval, it's still considered a number line. It just has to go up by the same thing every time. A non-example would be something like this. It's kind of like a bar graph, but it's called a histogram, which we are going to talk about later this week, maybe next week. Okay, it's a bar graph that's all connected. So that's a histogram. Line plots are a lot different because you're using X's, not bars. So after you've completed your line plot, sometimes they'll ask you about what a cluster is. A cluster is just a group of data that are close together. Okay, the reason they ask for clusters is because it shows where most of the data is located. Okay, sometimes on a line plot there's going to be a lot of numbers that show up more frequent than others, and that's what represents a cluster. So an example of a cluster would look something like this. So you have your line plot. One there. 3, 2, 2, 2, 1. So this right here would be our cluster, because it's a big group of numbers that are close together. So a non-example using the same number line would be this right here, just one. One is not a cluster. Okay, when they're looking for a cluster, they're talking about a bunch all together. So when you have all that, you can go ahead and go on to the next page. Alright, so on the next page, this is an example of a bar graph. Okay, we're just looking at the top. So, a bar graph is something that you've probably seen in the past. Okay, you've probably been working on bar graphs since like elementary school. Okay, it's basically just represents different data sets. In this case, they're talking about favorite colors. All right, so they got the colors down here, and then they asked the number of students who picked a favorite color. All right, so that's what bar graphs will use. All right, it doesn't typically use like a bunch of numbers, but sometimes it's just talking about how many people choose something. So, letter A, what is the most popular color?
Blue.
Blue. How do you know that?
Because it has 5.
It has the tallest, and it's got 5. 5 is the biggest number. So, how many students were surveyed? How do we find that? Add them all up. So how many did green have?
4.
Yellow,
2.
red,
3.
orange,
1.
blue,
5.
and purple.
3.
3. So add them all up.
18.
You get 18 students were surveyed all together. Okay, how many more students chose blue than orange?
4.
4. How did you find that?
4.
Just take 5 minus 1. All right, so when you have that, go to the next page. So that's a bar graph. Okay, the next one is called a pictograph. So down here it shows us the key that each 2 eyes represents 2 students. So how many students have blue eyes?
6.
6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So each one of these represents 2. So 6. Okay, how many students were surveyed altogether?
You gotta add them all up.
You gotta add them all up.
20.
20. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Because if you look down here, this represents 2.
I use my finger.
Okay, how many students have brown eyes? 8. Okay, so that's a pictograph. So you've worked with those in the past as well. So those are just a couple of different examples of graphs I want to talk about. All right, now on to line plots. So remember, a line plot is a data display that uses a number line that shows the frequency of each value. What's frequency mean for, like, in this case? What are we talking about when we say frequency?
How many times something happens?
How many times something happens. So if we're talking about a data set, what would we mean when how many times something happens? So what are we talking about? We're talking about repeated numbers. Okay, so we're looking for how many times a number shows up. That's what we're looking for. That's all line plots are. There's no calculations. There's no math. Okay, you're literally drawing a number line and then adding x's every time a number shows up. That's it. So a cluster was a group of data that are close together. So one tool to help display data is called a line plot. Okay, a line plot can also be called a dot plot. They will call it that sometimes too. It's just another name. Okay, a line plot, once again, uses a number line to show the number of times each value in a data set occurs. So you're not looking at like how many, you're not adding anything together. You're looking at the numbers and how many times they show up. So line plots show the spread, how many numbers are in the data, and then the distribution, how many times do they show up. So spread is talking about the wide range of numbers. Does it range from 0 to 5, 0 to 10? Okay, that's the spread. Distribution means how many times do those numbers show up? What's the frequency? What's the number or the repeating number? And then whenever you're working with a number line, you always have to have a consistent interval. You gotta go up by the same thing. If you go by 2s, you gotta go by 2s for the whole thing. If you go up by 1s, you gotta go by 1s for the whole thing. You can go by 10s, you can go by 5s. Whatever you need to do, find the pattern. But keep it. All right, now, so looking at this, they want us to identify a cluster. Where would the cluster be at? 2, 3, 4. So right here is our cluster. Okay, now they want us to recognize the peak. Where would the peak be at? At that 2, because it's the highest. Peak means the highest point. And then our last one is a gap. Where would a gap go?
5.
So right between, right there. You could say this right here is also a gap between 0 and 2. But the bigger gap is definitely 5 and 6. All right, so now we're going to make a line plot. So step 1 is to draw a number line. But to do that, you first have to look at what your minimum number is, so the smallest number, so you know where to start, and then you need to find your maximum number, the biggest number, so you know where to stop, so you don't go on and on forever. Okay, so looking at this, they've already done the number line for us, but what would be the minimum number here for the number of siblings? 0. Minimum means smallest. What would be the maximum number? 6. So in reality, all you really had to do was go from 0 to 6. They went 0 to 8. Okay, so that's why I tell you to look at the minimum and the maximum. So one way to do this is just go through and find all the zeros, or just go down the line. In this case, I'm just going to go down the line. So there's 1 0, so I put an X just like that, right above it. Then I go to 1, and then I go to 2, Got another 2, 3, another 2, 1, 4, 0. I'll get it. 3, 3, 6. Alright, so that's what a line plot looks like. There's no calculations whatsoever. We found the smallest number, we found the biggest number. And then you put X's above the numbers. They say you can use dots as well, but I wouldn't recommend it. The X's make things a lot easier because they're a little bit more visual, they're easier to see. So I would use X's every time. Yes?
So on here, so with the cluster, if you were to do the cluster, would you include that?
Yes, because it is there. So all these right here are all together. So the cluster would be this. Okay, so it's and where all of them meet, and if when there's a gap, that's where it stops. All right, let's go on to the next page. We're going to look at number 2. All right, so we're going to create a line plot using the data from the table. So in this case, it's the number of apps on the phones. So looking at this, what would be our minimum number?
0, 10,
10. We're on number 2. So 10 is our minimum. What would be our maximum number?
24,
24. So we got to go from 10 to 24. You can go by 1s, you can go by 2s. It's totally up to you. I would go by 1s because it's really not that big of a number spread. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I ran out of room. I have to write small. On the homework, you won't have to do that. All right, so now we go to the data set, and we just start putting X's where there's a number. So the first one is 16. The next, 19. Okay, and so just start filling it in. I like crossing them off just so I know that I've already done that. And that way I don't forget any. Because you have to have the exact amount of numbers on your number line. Okay, so you should have 1 at 10, 2 at 16, 3 at 19, 4 at 20, 3 at 21, 1 at 22, 3 at 23, and 3 at 24. So then looking at this, if they asked you for a cluster, where would it be at?
19 through 24.
19 through 24 would be your cluster. This would be considered the gap because that's the biggest one. And then where would the peak be at?
20.
20. Okay? So for the rest of the time, or for the next 5-10 minutes, okay, you're going to work with a partner by yourself. You're going to do number 1. Okay, so find the minimum, find the maximum, then fill in your number line and put your X's. And then number 3, you're answering questions about the line plot. So I'll give you a few minutes. Go ahead and get started. Looking at this, what would be the minimum? 0. What's the maximum?
9.
Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and then there's 4 zeros. There are 4 1s.
There's
5 zeros, sorry. Missed that one. 4 1s. 4 2s. 3 3s. 2 4s. 1 6. 1 9. And that is your line plot. That's all they're asking for. Any questions on that? All right, number 3. So now all you're doing is answering these following questions. So letter A, how many students spend 20 or more minutes walking to school? 5. Because you're going to count up all the ones that have 20 and everything above. How many students were surveyed? 7. And then what is the range of the data set?
40. 30.
30. Because it's from 0 to 30. If there's anything up there, then yes, it would be whatever they can put an X to. So if there was an X there, it would be 40. We're not going off the number line. You're going off the data and what the data set. So we're talking about the X's. Okay, any questions on this? All right, your homework today is on IXL. It is GG4. So all you're doing is making line plots. So IXL GG4. So go ahead and get started. You got the rest of the hour.